Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neville and June Bamber. June and Neville became the owners of White House Farm. A Royal Air Force veteran, after many years of service, he transitioned to a position as the master of a small local court. In 1949, June married he at the age of 25, and that same year, they moved into their new farmhouse. Their dream is to have children and build a happy, close family. However, June could not get pregnant. After numerous attempts, they discovered that the issue was genetic, and they would not be able to have biological children. However, they did not lose hope and they were able to find a way to become parents. The Bamber family adopted 2 children from an orphanage. First, they adopted Sheila, who was just 3 months old, and a few years later, they adopted 6-month-old Jeremy. June and Neville cared for and educated their adopted children conscientiously, giving them all their love and tenderness. As Sheila and Jeremy grew up, they ensured they received a good education by sending them to prestigious private schools with high-quality standards. The Bambers' financial situation was very good, allowing them to take care of themselves and their children fully and comfortably. Like any family, June and Neville also faced problems in their relationship. Not having a biological relationship with your children can sometimes make the situation more complicated. However, for the most part, their family life proceeded smoothly, without any major conflicts. In 1985, Sheila was 28, Jeremy was 24, and their adoptive parents, June and Neville, had just turned 60. That summer was so peaceful, with everyone enjoying the sun and nature, until the early hours of August 7th. At 3:30 a.m., Jeremy was awakened by an unexpected phone call. When he answered, he was shocked when he heard his father, Neville, on the other line. Neville's voice was frantic and distressed. He struggled to explain that Sheila had gone crazy and have weapons. While Jeremy still didn't fully understand what was going on, the call suddenly lost connection. Alarmed, Jeremy immediately contacted the police, relaying what Neville had said. He also warned them that Sheila could be dangerous. Despite the urgency, it took the police an hour and a half to arrive at the scene. By then, it was still dark, and the house was shrouded in shadows. The area was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos Neville had described. Since firearms were reportedly involved, the police approached cautiously, adhering to standard procedures. Then, they decided not to enter the house. Instead, they waited outside, wait for the task force to come and handle it. The police positioned themselves at a safe distance from the house and used a megaphone to try to communicate with anyone inside. For more than 2 hours, police tried to contact Bamber's family, but received no response. During this time, the police asked Jeremy to explain what had happened at the Bamber household the previous day. He explained that the entire family had gathered for dinner the night before. Toward the end of the evening, there had been a minor misunderstanding, but not serious. He also mentioned that he had left a pistol and a .22 caliber carbine with his parents. Both guns were in good working order and loaded. Nearly 3 hours after the first police officers arrived, at approximately 8 a.m., the special forces entered the house. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and somber. The team cautiously advanced, inspecting the first floor. When they entered the kitchen, they found a scene of chaos. A chair facing down on the ground, and next to it, in a pool of blood, was Neville's lifeless body. He had been shot 8 times, 6 of which hit the head, leaving him with little chance of survival. His hands and face were bruised and scraped, with a broken nose and jaw, shows that he fought back drastic against the attacker. The officers completed their search of the first floor, then, they moving upstairs. Each step had to be made with caution to avoid noise, but this is very difficult. Because the floor is old and makes a creaking sound every time it is moved. On the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, they discovered 4 more bodies. They found June, Sheila, and 2 6-year-old boys, Daniel and Nicholas, all of whom had been fatally shot. June had been struck by 7 bullets, while Daniel and Nicholas sustained 5 and 3 shots, respectively. Sheila was found on the threshold of her parents' bedroom, with 2 gunshot wounds under her chin. In total, 25 bullets were used to kill the 5 members of Bamber family. Initially, police theorized that the Bamber family members had been deliberately killed. But who could have committed such an act? Was the perpetrator an acquaintance of the family, who had long planned to harm them and then finally carried it out? Or was the criminal so clever that he tried to fool the police with a fake clue? These questions remained unanswered, prompting the authorities to immediately begin an investigation. It is remarkable that although Sheila and Jeremy were both very well educated, they grew up with completely different personalities. Jeremy was introverted from a young age, preferred solitude, and did poorly in elementary school. Sheila, on the other hand, always had many friends around her. Jeremy is hot-tempered and has difficulty controlling his emotions. Even though his parents tried to educate him, but he still did not change. Eventually, they decided to send him to boarding school, which happened in 1970, when he was 9 years old. Boarding schools in England at that time were famous for their strict and harsh discipline, applied to all ages of students. Attending such institutions was expensive, but this was not an issue for the Bambers. As soon as Jeremy entered the boarding school, he realized he could no longer behave as he had before, as any disobedience was met with punishment. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of telling his classmates that he had come from an orphanage. His friends used that information to bully him. They often taunted him about being adopted, calling him a bastard. His years at boarding school were a challenging period for him. Although they didn't teach him many good things, they did help him improve his character somewhat. Over time, Jeremy became calmer, went on to university, and successfully graduated. Neville was extremely proud of his son and even bought him a ticket to Australia. For the next 4 years, he traveled extensively across the country, spent time living in New Zealand, and eventually returned to England in 1982. Upon his return, his parents, Neville and June, asked him to work on their farm. Along with the job, they provided him with a place to live, a cottage 6 kilometers from the farm, along with a car and a monthly salary of nearly $1,000, a generous amount for the time. They wanted to ensure that he had a comfortable life and did everything they could to support him. Additionally, they hoped he would help them when they were old. June, a very religious woman, had a hard time accepting the fact that her children had different views and attitudes about religion. Throughout her life, she did everything she could to guide them toward what she believed was the true path and to bring them closer to God. Unfortunately, her efforts were unsuccessful. So, she had suffered from severe depression, and her mental health had greatly deteriorated. At the time, mental health issues were treated with a crude and outdated method, administering electric shocks to the patient. It was believed that this could positively influence brain function. June's depression wasn't caused solely by her son, Jeremy. Her daughter Sheila, despite her calmer demeanor, also caused her great distress. Sheila enjoyed looking at magazines featuring models in provocative poses. Sheila dreamed of becoming a model and appearing on the cover of such magazines. However, she does not support this. But Sheila's problems don't stop there. One day, Sheila announced to her parents that she was pregnant. In many families, the news might have been met with joy, but the Bamber family is not like that. Sheila was still a teenager and unmarried, which made the situation complicated. June, her adoptive mother, faced a difficult decision. Should she pressure Sheila to have an abortion? As a Christian, June could not condone abortion, but at the same time, allowing the child to be born is unacceptable. Then, June told Sheila to make her own choice, but on the condition that if she had an abortion, no one in the family would know. This makes the relationship between June and Sheila more and more tense. In 1977, despite her parents' objections, Sheila is married to Colin Caffell. They on to have twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel. Initially, their family life seemed happy, but Sheila began to suspect Colin of infidelity. Her suspicions were correct, and she eventually filed for divorce. In 1982, they are officially divorced, which had a devastating impact on Sheila's mental health. She couldn't bear the shock from the divorce, so she fell into depression, and she was eventually admitted to a mental hospital for treatment. Nicholas and Daniel were sent to an orphanage, where they stayed for nearly 2 years. During this time, Sheila's mental health deteriorated further. She became increasingly anxious, frequently spoke about ending her own life and that of her children, whom she believed were possessed by the devil. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Meanwhile, Sheila and Jeremy seemed to swap positions with each other. Jeremy, who was a rebel for years, now lives a peaceful and stable life. In 1985, Sheila reconciled with her ex-husband, Colin. Together, they removed Nicholas and Daniel from the orphanage and start a new life together. In August, Neville and June invited Sheila and her family to visit, so they could reunite with their grandchildren, Daniel von Nicholas. They hadn't seen their 2 nephews in a long time. They decided that the family would spend a week together, after which Colin would take the boys on a trip to Norway. On Tuesday, August 6, 1985, Colin brought the boys to the family farm. And everyone gathered at the Bamber house. The day was filled with joy. There was a family dinner, a happy atmosphere, and delicious food. Later, Neville and June asked Sheila to take Daniel and Nicholas back to the orphanage, arguing that she couldn't provide them with a proper education. This suggestion angered Sheila. She replied that she would make the decision herself. The calm atmosphere of the evening was disrupted at 8:30 p.m. Around the same time, Jeremy left the house. Barbara Wilson, the secretary at Bamber Farm, called Neville regarding a work-related matter. When Neville answered, she realized he seemed very annoyed. In the background, she could hear raised voices, as though people were arguing or upset about something. This was unusual for the Bamber family, which surprised she. However, she couldn't learn more about the situation because Neville quickly ended the call and hung up. The next morning, everyone present in Bamber's house was shot dead. Jeremy, the only survivor, was informed of the tragedy. Overcome with grief, he couldn't hold back his tears. Investigators treated him with respect, allowing him time to gather himself before beginning their questioning. Jeremy shared everything he knew, including the hardships Sheila went through, and the argument that had occurred at the dinner table on the evening of August 6, shortly before he decided to leave the house. At first glance, the crime that Sheila committed seemed to be an act of desperation and impulsivity, because at the time, she was suffering from mental illness. After hearing Neville and June's suggestion that she should return her 2 sons to the orphanage, she felt the interference in her private life was unacceptable. When she lost control, she grabbed a weapon and shot Neville, June, Daniel, Nicholas, and finally shoot yourself. Investigators believe this is what happened. However, there is one very strange detail. Sheila had been shot twice in different parts of her body. How could she have managed to do this to herself? The actions of the detectives were puzzling. They decided to burn the blood-soaked bedsheets carpet, where the bodies were found. They explained that they wanted to help Jeremy avoid the painful memories of the incident. Furthermore, the weapon discovered at the crime scene, which was a key piece of evidence, was improperly handled by the investigator. They picked it up with their bare hands without wearing gloves. A few days later, Bamber's family funeral was held, and Jeremy attended. He seemed distraught over the tragedy, weeping over the coffins of his sister, parents, and nephews. However, on that day, the investigation was reopened. Relatives of Bamber's family have expressed concerns about Jeremy's unusual behavior. Despite his tears, he made odd remarks, such as referring to himself as the boss. They found him smiling with the look of someone satisfied with victory. They reported this to police, causing police to conduct a more thorough investigation. Crime scenes need to be investigated carefully and meticulously to avoid drawing hasty conclusions. The detectives began by examining the weapon. They discovered fingerprints from several individuals, including the investigator who had handled the gun without gloves. The appearance of Sheila and Jeremy's fingerprints is not surprising. Jeremy admitted the gun was his, explaining he had purchased it for hunting. It is also understandable that Sheila's fingerprints were on the gun, as the initial theory suggested she had used the gun as the murder weapon. A few days later, Jeremy's cousin secretly went to the Bamber family home to search the house. He convinced that Sheila was not involved in the murder. By this point, Jeremy had inherited to his family home and was living there alone. During the search, the cousin inspected every room and the closet, and he found a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine. Length of the gun, combined with the silencer, made it impossible for the attacker to have turned the weapon on themselves and fired. This discovery strongly suggested that Sheila could not have been the perpetrator. If Sheila had fired the gun without the silencer, a new question arises: why were traces of blood found on the end of the silencer? Sheila, who had been shot twice and was bleeding, could not have removed the silencer and hidden it deep in the closet. This suggests that the silencer was attached to the rifle in the murders. From this point, everything started to become clear. Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, suspects him of being involved in killing his family. She contacted investigators and shared some information. She revealed that on the night of August 7th, Jeremy had called her, saying there were problems. However, when she tried to ask what was wrong, he abruptly hung up. She also recalled that shortly before the murders, he had repeatedly complained about his family. Most importantly, she revealed that the Bamber family had drawn up a will, which stated that all assets would be passed on to their children after their deaths. This made Jeremy very angry. He did not want to share the inheritance with his sister, Sheila. In addition, Jeremy also told Julie that he wanted to kill his family and blame it on Sheila, a mentally ill person. She reported all of this to the police, not because she wanted to help the investigation, but because she was feeling angry, so she had just learned that Jeremy had a new girlfriend. However, there is no direct evidence to prove Jeremy's guilt. He tried to mislead the investigation. He gave the police the name of a suspect, a plumber he'd have hired. However, when investigators questioned the plumber, they learned that he was completely innocent. He also has a solid alibi, helped to remove any suspicion against him. As a result, Jeremy Bamber became the primary suspect. He was taken into custody due to his inability to provide an alibi. However, the police released him after failing to find evidence linking him to the massacre. Surprisingly, he was allowed to leave the country. After inheriting the property, Jeremy's financial situation improved a lot. He sold Neville's car and to Saint-Tropez, France. Upon returning to England on September 29th, he was arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial began on October 3rd. One of the main points raised in court was about Neville's injuries. His body showed multiple bruises, suggesting that he had tried to defend himself from an attack. The medical examiner speculated that the injuries were caused by the same .22 caliber carbine. Sheila, a petite and frail woman, it seemed unlikely that she could have inflicted such severe injuries on her father. In contrast, Jeremy appeared capable of doing so. Neville's body showed signs of a struggle, with multiple bruises. Sheila also received several blows, but there were no signs of a struggle on her body, and her nails remained intact. The defense countered these arguments that believed that Sheila suffered from mental illness, which made her the prime suspect, capable of committing a five-fold murder. They emphasized that she grew up on a farm, was skilled at handling guns, and was an experienced target shooter. Additionally, Jeremy's lawyers highlighted that Sheila's blood was fresher than the rest of the family's, so they claiming that she ended her life after killing others. This, they argued, could have been due to guilt or the sound of approaching police cars. However, the prosecution disputed these claims. If Sheila had been the killer and then end her life, then the policeman on duty near the house, they will hear the last gunshot. However, no sound was detected. Furthermore, Sheila could not have pulled the trigger with the silencer attached, as it would have been out of her reach. The silencer was also found in a closet, rather than on the carbine where it logically should have been. The defense is in a difficult position because it has no arguments to refute the prosecution. According to the prosecution's argument, the motive for the murder stemmed from Jeremy's anger when he learned the contents of the will. In the will, the inheritance was divided equally between him and Sheila. His greed for the inheritance led him to plan a massacre. On August 6, between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., Jeremy left his relative's house and went home. Later that night, he returned to their house on a bicycle he had taken from his mother, June, a few days earlier. He took a roundabout route and entered the house through an open bathroom window on the first floor. He climbed inside, retrieved the loaded gun, and went to June's bedroom. Then, he shot and killed her with 2 shots. Next, he aimed the gun at Neville, but Neville woke up and tried to defend himself, leading to a fight. During the struggle, he managed to shoot Neville. After killing Neville, Jeremy returned to the bedroom and killed Sheila and her 2 children, Daniel von Nicholas. He then staged the scene to make it look like Sheila was the perpetrator, he placing the carbine in her hands. With his crime complete, he left the house on his bike. He called his girlfriend, Julie, almost revealing what he had done, and then called the police to report that Neville had allegedly called him. However, if Neville was threatened with a weapon, he would contact the police, not Jeremy. Jeremy's actions seemed to make everyone feel strange. Why didn't he come to the crime scene immediately after Neville's call? After considering the evidence and various assumptions, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and reaching a verdict. Ultimately, Jeremy Bamber was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison with no chance of parole. Jeremy, meanwhile, maintains his innocence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Christina Purcell. Christina Purcell, a 41-year-old veterinarian, worked at a clinic in the small town of Greer, South Carolina, which has a population of 35,000. Her colleagues all described her as an exceptional person. She was regarded as the best in her department and was highly experienced. She had a great sense of humor, which helped alleviate challenging situations at work. Her co-workers respected her, and management highly valued her talents. Christina had a young daughter, whom she co-parented with her ex-husband, John Mello, during the early years of her life. Friends and acquaintances all agreed that her daughter meant everything to her. After their daughter's birth, Christina and John separated but maintained joint custody. Then, she was engaged to a new partner named Bradley. Despite an apparently perfect life, but she was involved in a custody battle with her ex-husband, John, and the custody dispute between them was intense. On October 5, 2021, when their daughter visited her father, John, he flew her to Italy. This prompted Christina to file a complaint against him for violating custody, which further strained their relationship. Christina even launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for her legal expenses, and many people contributed. On October 13, 2021, Bradley, aged 65, tried calling Christina's in the morning. After she failed to answer, he went to her house. He knocked, and when there was no response, he entered through the back door. Inside, he discovered a horrifying scene. Her lifeless body was in the living room with rose petals scattered around. So, he immediately called 911, but it was too late to save her. Police discovered over 30 stab wounds on her body, mostly on her head, face, and neck. Although the scene was chaotic, it did not resemble a typical robbery. The police found unusual mystical objects in the house, hinting that someone unstable might have conducted a sacrificial ritual. This led investigators to consider the possibility of a ritual murder. Forensic experts determined that Christina was murdered elsewhere. Evidence of dragging was found throughout the house, and in some areas, the body was left behind and placed in various positions, possibly to take photographs of sexual acts. Later, the body was moved to the living room and covered with rose petals, with petals also strewn along the path where it was dragged. When information about the incident leaked to the press, they dubbed it the rose petal murder. At that moment, the police have not found any signs of forced entry into the house. However, Bradley, who alerted emergency services, had entered through the back door. He informed detectives that this door was always left unlocked, suggesting the intruder could have entered the same way. At the crime scene, detectives discovered clear signs of staging that complicated their investigation. They had to sort through numerous conflicting pieces of evidence to discard the irrelevant and find the right direction. Detectives have never encountered such complex and confusing murder cases before, making it difficult to determine which lead to pursue. They suspected that the murder was intentional. The perpetrator had specifically gone to Christina's house to commit it. And detectives must find out his motives and who he is. Inside the house, they found memory cards and the laptop in the living room near the body. A transparent handbag containing a powerful illegal drug was also discovered. There were small droplets of dried blood, and Christina's mobile phone lay nearby. In the hallway, a bag was found with 2 white envelopes, each containing $500 in cash. A suitcase held a firearm, a single-shot self-defense pistol, and numerous documents related to a court case involving Christina's daughter, prompting detectives to consider the possibility that her ex-husband, John Mello, was involved. Forensic experts used luminol to examine the entire house, enabling them to detect even the smallest traces of blood. They discovered hundreds of tiny blood spots in various places, highlighting the attack's brutality. Christina suffered a significant loss of blood and endured severe pain before dying. She was stabbed 31 times. The police scrutinized Christina's mobile phone for any leads. Initially, detectives focused on whether her partner, Bradley, who found her body, might be involved in the attack. To compare information, they also retrieved his mobile phone to analyze its contents. Police noticed peculiar behavior from he was highly agitated. His reaction didn't seem like that of a grieving fiancé. He was trembling, inconsistent in his statements, and wore gloves throughout his interactions with the investigators. This behavior only heightened the suspicion of law enforcement. Later, it became clear that their suspicions were justified. While investigating Christina and Bradley's devices, the police uncovered shocking details about Bradley's life, clarifying his nervous behavior. They had strong reasons to suspect that he was exploiting her daughter, Jane Doe, to create explicit content. In February and August, he recorded videos and took photographs of Jane nude in various inappropriate poses. These materials were found on the phone and laptop that were confiscated for examination. However, it is not clear whether this was done secretly or with her consent. Doubts emerged after the police discovered more disturbing information from Bradley's laptop that revealed unsettling aspects of the intimate relationship between Christina and he. The police uncovered increasingly disturbing information, including a new type of victim, animals. Numerous photographs were discovered showing individuals involved in sexual acts with animals, mainly dogs. Shockingly, Christina, one of the clinic's leading veterinarians, who occasionally took animals home for temporary care, was involved in these acts. According to state law, such sexual offenses can result in up to 5 years in prison, and the offender must pay a fine of at least $500, which may be increased at the court's discretion. Law enforcement described these recordings as some of the most repulsive materials they had ever encountered. The public was outraged upon learning that Christina, a seemingly kind woman from a veterinary clinic, was involved in such acts with her daughter and dogs. After discovering all this evidence, Bradley Post was arrested on October 19, 2021. He was charged with the sexual exploitation of a minor and the distribution of explicit materials. It emerged that he not only created photos and videos but also sold them. Additionally, the police considered the possibility of his involvement of Christina's death, but he firmly denied any involvement. Detectives found no evidence linking him to the murder. There was no trace of blood on his body or clothes. Furthermore, Christina had died several hours before he arrived at the house, leading the police to doubt his connection to the murder. Christina's ex-husband, John Mello, is also a suspect in the case. His main motive was gaining full custody of their daughter, which he did not want to share with Christina. This is a common motive for murder. However, at the time of the crime, John was in Italy with his daughter. This alibi was easy to verify since he hadn't returned to the country. Despite this, investigators kept John on their list of suspects, considering he might have orchestrated the crime indirectly. John returned to the country on October 21, 2021, a week after Christina's murder. Following his return, the police obtained a warrant for his detention. He sought help from his best friend, Zachary Hughes, who was 29 years old at the time. Zachary seemed suspicious to the police, so they looked deeper into his background. He was born and raised in Morro Bay, California. The turning point for him came in 2005 when his parents vacationed in Virginia. During this trip, they adopted 5 children from Russia. These children had suffered abuse in their previous foster families, resulting in physical and psychological trauma. The adoption aimed to teach Zachary and his brother Ellie about morality and to provide the adopted children with a safe, loving, and stable home. Zachary and Ellie struggled to communicate with their new siblings, leading to frequent family conflicts due to misunderstandings. Zachary's entire family worked on the farm, but he had a special talent: he studied music. His parents bought him a piano, and he became very skilled at playing it, which was especially noticeable in high school. He started participating in music competitions and won first place at the Southeastern Piano Festival. He has achieved great success, even performing a solo program with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2010, he applied to the Juilliard School in New York, where Irina taught piano at an advanced level. Not only was Zachary accepted, but he was also offered several scholarships for his exceptional talent. Thanks to his exceptional talent, Zachary outperformed all his classmates and became the only student from the USA selected to participate in the International Music Festival in Kyoto. Only 11 people from around the world were chosen for this event. Those who know he say he is a loyal friend, highly moral, and very good at communication. In his free time, he used his skills to help those in need, often performing for free at rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, and hospitals to bring joy to people. By 2018, Zachary enrolled in a master's program in piano performance at the university. At that time, he had a strong desire to help people globally. This led him to volunteer for the United States Marine Corps and apply to a military educational institution to become an officer within a year. He understood the intricacies of military service, but at the start of his second year, he suffered fractures in both legs. This injury forced him to halt his studies and receive the title of Hello. Around this time, a woman reached out to Zachary, seeking a talented pianist for a church in Greer, South Carolina. He accepted the offer and moved there to perform regularly. And he received half of the donations collected from churchgoers. Initially, this provided a good income, but by the mid-2020s, the pandemic significantly reduced the number of church attendees. As a result, he had to find new income sources. He began giving solo performances throughout the city and state and took on additional part-time jobs. Additionally, he started a blog offering valuable piano lessons. To support his performances, he acquired portable electrical equipment, which provided him with the necessary mobility. While living and working in South Carolina, Zachary met John, Christina's ex-husband and a former music producer. John supported Zachary by helping him with performances and offers him a part-time job. Between mid-2020 and 2021, when he assisted John with household chores, which deepened their friendship. He became John's closest friend. As a result, the police questioned him about his possible involvement in Christina's murder, wondering if John could have asked him to do such a thing. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed CCTV footage from a camera located near Christina's house. A camera installed in the peephole of the house opposite captured all the incident outside Christina's home on the day of her murder. The footage showed a stranger wearing dark clothing and a hooded jacket entering her house around 10 a.m. A few hours after, the stranger left on a bicycle, this time wearing a mask. Christina did not leave the house, and no one else visited, until the next day, when Bradley arrived and found her dead. This evidence cleared Bradley from the list of suspects in the murder case, although he remained in jail on other charges. Investigators suspected that a stranger in dark clothing, captured on camera, was the killer, but they couldn't identify him. His face was covered, and there were no distinguishing features on his body. They then requested footage from surveillance cameras along the bicycle paths to trace his movements and began reviewing the recordings. This process was lengthy but fruitful. The bicycle appeared in several videos, including one where the stranger in black was loading it into the back of his pickup truck. Although the grainy footage obscured the license plate, the model, make, and color of the truck matched Zachary's vehicle. It seemed he was involved in the brutal murder of Christina's. The police obtained a warrant to search Zachary's house. There, they found a bicycle identical to the one used by the attacker. They seized Zachary's computer for examination. Through this, they discovered active correspondence between John and Zachary, uncovering over 1,700 text messages, most of which were encrypted. The messages were clearly coded and contained hidden information. Additionally, some texts were jumbled. They probably did this to distract the police if the police suddenly contacted them. Detectives found the following clues in the messages. On April 17, 2021, 6 months before Christina's death, John asked to host a party for her. This message was not encrypted. On the day of the murder, John asked a friend how the musical performance went, and the friend replied that everything was great. Although it seemed like a harmless question, the police discovered there was no performance that day. They suspected that John used performance as a code word for the murder of Christina. All other information on Zachary's phone was either encrypted or deleted. He also used an access code unknown to the police, which complicated and delayed their investigation. Additionally, they couldn't obtain data on the device's location at the time of the attack on Christina. The phone was frequently switched to flight mode, including when the mysterious masked man came to Christina's house. It appears this was done on purpose to prevent Zachary from being tracked and to avoid involvement in the crime scene. Based on the evidence collected, officers obtained a warrant for Zachary's arrest. While they were preparing to file charges, Zachary was invited to perform on an international cruise. By the time the warrant was issued, he was already in Europe, so the detectives had to wait. Fortunately, when the charges were filed, Zachary had returned to Michigan, unaware that they were planning to arrest him. He could have easily left the country by crossing into Canada or taking another flight to a cruise ship. However, once he learned about the charges, he voluntarily returned to South Carolina and surrendered to the police, believing they were mistaken. On November 3, 2021, Zachary hired lawyers to defend his reputation, stating he was not guilty of any wrongdoing and intended to refute the slander tarnishing his name. However, he refused to allow the police access to his phone, prompting them to file a court petition. The court subsequently ordered full access to the mobile phone. Despite this, he repeatedly provided incorrect passwords, which delayed the investigation. Finally, by April 8, 2023, after approximately 700,000 attempts, the smartphone was unlocked. The police discovered crucial messages between John and he, discussing their encrypted plans to kill Christina. While these messages were intended to be used as trial evidence, they were considered circumstantial and insufficient to determine the trial's outcome. Zachary and John were known for their impeccable reputation, supported by many witnesses, and had no prior criminal history. The jury could not rely solely on correspondence and footage of a similar car to convict them. More new evidence emerged when a forensic examination uncovered the criminal's DNA under Christina's fingernails, which matched Zachary's DNA. Consequently, the police could confidently assert that he was the one who attacked and brutally killed Christina in her home. The defense argued that the CCTV footage did not clearly show the criminal's face or accurately identify the car involved. As a result, they labeled the evidence as circumstantial, as initially assumed. They emphasized that Zachary had no prior legal issues and was described by friends and acquaintances as a kind person incapable of committing a violent crime. Additionally, there was no apparent motive for him to attack Christina. And the lawyers rejected the DNA test results, claiming the samples were tampered with or contaminated. From the outset of the trial, once the public became aware that Zachary, the renowned musician, might face imprisonment, the court received numerous letters from dissatisfied people. These letters came from former classmates, teachers, Zachary's friends, and even people who didn't personally know him but admired his musical talent. Among the supporters were also numerous employers who praised his skills. Collectively, they vouched for his character, adamantly believing that someone as talented and kind-hearted could not be a murderer. In total, the court received over 50 such letters. The lawyers emphasized that Zachary had no previous legal issues. He had served in the U.S. Army, having volunteered and pursued education to become an officer rather than just serving as a private soldier. Additionally, Zachary could have avoided any legal troubles by simply accepting an invitation to return to work on a cruise liner. However, he chose to return to his home state and turn himself into the police as soon as he learned about the charges against him. He was fully aware of everything, including the warrants that the police were obtaining to investigate further. Despite this, he wasn't deterred because he believed he was innocent. The lawyers presented this as key evidence of his innocence. Zachary requested to be released on a $100,000 bail so he could be placed under house arrest with his parents until the trial, allowing him to stay in a calm environment where he could play his favorite instrument. He also agreed to have no contact with the families involved in the case. However, the court denied his bail request, leading to his transfer to prison. He remains there, awaiting trial set for 2024. He continues to deny any involvement in Christina's death. John also denies all charges. During a conversation with investigators, he explained that he fled to Italy with his daughter. He said he was exhausted from legal battles with his Christina and was horrified to discover that her fiancé, Bradley, had inappropriate intentions towards his 9-year-old daughter. Evidence suggested Christina was involved, as she appeared in some photos with her daughter. So John claims he took his daughter away to protect her from Christina, her unstable mother. He intended to challenge for custody using the explicit photos taken by Bradley and believed he had a strong case. If Christina lost custody, John would have no motive to harm her. Nevertheless, John repeatedly insisted he would fight for his daughter at any cost, despite he not commenting on his connection to Zachary. The prosecution believes Zachary is involved because his DNA was found under Christina's fingernails, indicating she resisted him. He may be either a co-conspirator or a victim of John's manipulation. The investigation into Christina Purcell's death has become intricate, full of unexpected developments and mysteries. Detectives persist in seeking justice for her, gradually assembling clues to identify the mastermind and uncover the case's dark secrets. Although the journey to bring justice to she may be long, but it will certainly not stop. The investigation team hopes that the case will soon be illuminated, allowing she to rest in peace. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Brian King and Christina Benjamin. On July 29, 1993, it was a hot day in Alice County, Texas, USA. Despite the heat, a road crew was working on Cato Road to prepare the ground for asphalt. During their break, one worker leveling gravel spotted something unusual in the thick bushes across the Smith Creek River. The object, about 100 meters away, had a grayish color that made it stand out from the surrounding greenery. Curiosity prompted the worker and a colleague to climb over a barbed wire fence to investigate the mysterious object. As they got closer, about 10 meters from the object, a foul stench hit their noses. The stench became unbearable, and they covered their noses with their clothes. As they got closer, they discovered that the object was a corpse. It appeared to be a she, probably of school age. The gruesome sight showed torn flesh covered in flies, but the most shocking aspect was that the girl's head and arms were missing. The workers quickly notified their supervisor and decided to call the police. Without cell phones and far from the nearest town, they decided to leave one worker with the body while the other went to a small neighboring town to seek help. The police arrived shortly after being notified and began examining the scene for evidence and any dismembered body parts. However, a more gruesome discovery awaited them just 300 meters away. They discovered the body of a young girl and also found the body of a young man, who appeared to be about 15 years old. He was lying face down on the riverbank, about 10 meters from the bridge. Unlike the girl, he was still dressed and had not been dismembered. It appeared that he had been thrown into the river, and the current had washed him to shore. Retrieving the young man's body was much more difficult than accessing the girl's remains, so the police called the city fire department for assistance. With the help of special equipment, they were able to reach his body. Meanwhile, a team of forensic experts remained at the scene to investigate and collect evidence before it got too dark. Police worked the scene until the sun went down. They focused on the area where the bodies were found, and the medical examiner analyzed the victims. The expert determined that the first body, the girl, was that of a teenage girl who had been stabbed multiple times. She had been shot twice in the back with a .22 caliber gun, and her head had been severed from her body. It was likely with a large hunting knife or possibly an axe. The body showed numerous severe wounds on the abdomen, thighs, and genitals, with some resembling intricate hieroglyphs carved into the skin. There was a long, deep cut on the stomach, similar to those made during an autopsy. The criminal expert noted signs of extreme cruelty inside the cavity, including torn intestines and severed hands. Bruises that looked like marks from handcuffs suggested the victims had been restrained for a period before the torture started. Additionally, both of the girls' breasts had been removed. Experts believe the victims' bodies had been dead for 2 days, judging by their level of decomposition. He had been shot twice in the head with a similar weapon. There were no signs of a beating or struggle on his body. Police believe the attacker may have severed the girl's arms and head to make identification more difficult. However, he may not have realized that advanced DNA identification methods were available. However, the condition of the bodies and their decomposition could make this identification quite difficult. Forensic scientists found that the girl had been sexually assaulted. The high temperatures had caused significant decomposition, making it difficult to determine the exact details of the crime. Police believe the attack was carried out in anger or extreme hatred. However, the presence of fly larvae allowed researchers to determine a more precise time of death for both teens. The victims were tortured on the night of July 26th to 27th. To support their findings, the forensic expert consulted a forensic entomologist who studies the growth of insects on decomposing bodies and the damage they cause. Ultimately, the lab staff agreed that the time of death had been accurately determined. However, some errors regarding the timeline of the investigation had to be cleared up. Since the boy's hands and head were intact, forensic experts were puzzled as to how he escaped the same fate as the girl. They questioned why his hands were not cut off, as this would have made it easier for the criminal to conceal the victim's identity. The killer likely thought that the boy's body would be lost in the current or would drown, making it difficult to find. This might explain why he didn't dismember the body, or perhaps the body fell into the water by accident. The police believed that the dismemberment was not meant to mislead the investigation but might have been motivated by something more disturbing. Many serial killers keep trophies from their crimes. It's possible that the girl's head became part of such a gruesome collection because the attack resembled that of a maniac. The police's first goal was to find the girl's clothes. During their search, they found a clump of light-colored hair caught in the barbed wire that the workers had crossed. Police believed that this hair might have come from the decapitated victim. Unfortunately, the mutilated body had no identifying marks. However, in the boy's pocket, they found a book subscription card from a town registered to Brian King. They were able to confirm the details at the library, but it was closed for the night, so they would have to wait until morning. The next morning, the police station received a report about the disappearance of two teenagers from a small town, the same one where the library was located. The boy's name was Brian King, and the girl's name was Christina Benjamin. After receiving the report, police visited the boy's home and showed the wallet they had found to the father who answered the door. He confirmed that it belonged to his 14-year-old son, Brian, who was missing along with his 13-year-old stepdaughter, Christina, who had blonde hair. Days before the incident, around midnight, the children's father was awakened by a suspicious car that honked its horn and drove off. During this time, Brian was sleeping in a tent outside the house, which was unusual for a teenager. The car returned just 10 to 15 minutes later. The father noticed his son talking calmly with the driver and assumed it was one of Brian's friends. He spotted a man with blonde hair in the back seat but couldn't see the driver. Feeling reassured, he went to the bathroom. When he came back, the car and his son were gone. The father thought Brian had gone out with friends and planned to discuss this odd situation with him in the morning, so he went to bed. However, Brian never returned home, and it was later discovered that Christina had also disappeared. The parents started contacting friends and acquaintances of their children, but no one had seen the teenagers. The family had a younger girl who shared a room with Christina. She reported that on the night they disappeared, Brian entered their room and woke up Christina. He mentioned that some cool guys had arrived in a car and invited them to a party. Christina agreed, and they both left home together. Eventually, their parents reported the children missing to the police. They noted that before their disappearance, Christina had injured her foot during a school class. Upon further investigation, it was found that Christina's hair was on the forensic expert's desk. She had light hair, which was compared to strands found on a fence and those collected from home combs. The results showed that the hairs did not match, indicating they could belong to a likely killer, who also appeared to have light hair. With no evidence available, forensic experts had to rely on alternative methods. They discovered fibers on Brian's shoes that matched the material used in the carpets of Japanese cars. Brian's father provided a description of the car he saw, mentioning that it was dark in color. However, his description lacked detail, as he could not recall the specific model or license plate number. Police were particularly puzzled by the brutality that Christina had suffered. If this was not a personal hate crime, it would suggest they were dealing with a very dangerous person who was likely to commit further acts of violence. They speculate that the motive behind such cruelty could have been sexual. After interviewing the friends of the murdered teenagers, the police learned that on the evening of her disappearance, Christina was supposed to meet a man named Jason. All the witnesses who spoke to the police pointed to Jason Massey as the only person capable of committing such a crime. One of his friends revealed that Jason had long ago turned to a darker lifestyle. He had dropped out of school, never held a job, frequently killed animals, and kept their heads as trophies. Jason did not hide his disturbing interests. He once made a chilling comment, expressing enjoyment in saying that if a serial killer were active in the area, it would be him. Although he liked to boast about such things, people generally did not take him seriously. Jason was described as having long, curly blonde hair and was 20 years old at the time of these events. His mother was indifferent towards him, even hiding food in his room. The family frequently moved, faced evictions due to unpaid rent, and often lived in unstable conditions. Jason had a difficult childhood, living in a car and facing a harsh environment. He was addicted to alcohol and drugs, bullied weaker children and started harming animals. His father was also addicted to drugs and treated him badly. During Jason's school years, his father was incarcerated for a long time, but it had a serious impact on his mental health. Jason was involved in various petty crimes, including stalking. There was an incident where he killed a girl's dog because she rejected his advances, and he continued to stalk her, leaving her extremely scared. As a child, Jason loved his younger brother but grew to hate adults. As an adult, his feelings for women became entwined with violent fantasies. He also believed in ghosts and thought he could hear them speaking to him, influenced by religious stories told to him by his devout grandmother. The year the two teenagers were murdered, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison after a police officer discovered a dead cat and some suspicious cutting tools in his car. Unfortunately, he was released early and never faced the consequences of his actions. Police reported that when Jason was arrested, he was wearing handcuffs and appeared to be enjoying the situation. Jason did not resist arrest and confidently stated that he would be released soon. After searching his home, police found numerous newspaper clippings about the murders, a collection of adult videos, a box filled with handcuffs, and knives that had traces of blood. His room also contained books on satanic themes. In the Jason's car, a brown 1982 Subaru, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be blood stains, particularly concentrated in the trunk. They also found duct tape with light hair that did not belong to the Jason, a receipt for ammunition, a hunting knife, and a brown carpet with fibers matching those found at the crime scene. During questioning, the Jason denied any involvement in the crimes. He assumed he knew where the severed body parts were and even offered to lead the police to them. They searched the forest for several hours together but found nothing. After returning to the station, Jason requested a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the police. Soon after, the police received an anonymous tip suggesting that Jason was the only one who could be responsible for the teenagers' massacre. Later, a witness emerged who had spent much of the evening of July 26 with Jason. She stated that he had left home acting strangely aggressive, likely due to drug use. She noticed he had handcuffs and a gun, which made her uneasy, but she didn't report it to the police because she was afraid of him. The girl later said that Jason owned a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used to shoot the Brian and Christina, and that he had purchased ammunition shortly before killing the two children. DNA evidence from blood and hair found in his car matched the victims. Police gathered more and more circumstantial evidence linking Jason to the massacre, while he had no alibi. That evening, his friends and acquaintances found him strange, and some even felt afraid of him. A teacher from the school Jason attended said he was fixated on disturbing images, including satanic symbols. He often spoke about murders, which frightened some of his classmates. At that point, there was no solid evidence against him. To establish Jason's connection, the FBI was called in to create a criminal profile using photographs from the crime scene. During the investigation, it was discovered that Jason's mother had discovered several of Jason's notebooks the previous June. These notebooks contained disturbing content, including a list of girls Jason wanted to kill, with detailed descriptions of the violent acts he fantasized about. Christina was at the top of the list. The alarming nature of the diary prompted Jason's mother to seek help from a psychotherapy clinic after reading them. A psychiatrist assessed Jason and concluded that he posed a danger to himself and society, leading to his admission for intensive care and further observation. However, not all medical professionals agreed with the diagnosis of antisocial disorder. Most doctors, after conducting evaluations, opposed this diagnosis, resulting in Jason's release from the clinic without further treatment. Jason's writings became crucial evidence in the case, as they showed his obsession with thoughts of murder and torture directed at young girls for several years. He claimed that his desire to kill was motivated purely by sexual arousal. On March 17, 1994, Jason was charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder, yet he maintained his innocence. 3 weeks after the charges were filed, the hearings commenced. The prosecutor's office intended to pursue the death penalty for the defendant, which is permitted under Texas law. The hearing started on September 28, 1994. The prosecution alleged that in mid-July 1993, Jason confided in a friend that he had obtained ammunition, knives, and handcuffs, and that he had devised a plan to kidnap Christina from her home. He used Brian to entice both teenagers into a car, claiming they were going to a party. Once inside, he quickly disposed of the boy and shot him in the car. Christina attempted to flee, but he injured her, caught her, and proceeded to torment her. The prosecution worried that Jason could evade justice since the public defender argued that the investigation was biased. The police focused only on Jason as a suspect after hearing about a mysterious individual, neglecting to consider other possibilities. The defense lawyer pointed out to the jury that the evidence and assumptions made by the prosecution needed further investigation. Jason's sister testified during the trial, sharing details about their challenging childhood. They often attended school unwashed, beaten, and hungry. As a result, Jason struggled to focus on his studies, despite his efforts. However, her testimony backfired when the prosecution pointed out that, despite their hardships, his sister managed to lead a decent life without committing violence. This was argued as a reason why Jason's background couldn't justify his cruel actions. The prosecution's team included a forensic expert and a forensic entomologist, who provided a thorough report on Christina's autopsy and the severe injuries she endured. Their findings indicated a brutal and unrestrained act of violence, suggesting that allowing Jason to leave the courtroom would be a grave injustice. One of the witnesses for the prosecution was Chris Nowlin, the same friend who was driving the car that transported the teenagers from their home. He chose to cooperate with the prosecution by testifying against Jason in exchange for immunity from criminal charges related to his involvement. Jason convinces his friend Chris to meet his girlfriend. Jason lies that he has been dating Christina since high school. When they reach a secluded area near a bridge, where Jason reveals his dark intentions to Chris. He plans to take Christina and Brian into the woods, kill them, and attack the girl. Chris dismisses Jason's words, as he often jokes about such things and never carries them out. Jason's former classmate testified that he had been stalking Christina for an extended period. After she rejected his advances in 7th grade, he killed her dog out of revenge and used its blood to stain her parents' car. The stalker also sent her disturbing photos of decapitated women, claiming this was how she would end up. A gun store salesman confirmed that he sold ammunition to Jason, which was later matched to the ammunition used in the murders. The day after the crime, Jason went to the wash to clean the car, but forensic experts discovered important evidence there. According to Jason's mother, he had joined a religious community shortly before the massacre, and she believed he was genuinely trying to change his ways. However, diary entries presented in court painted a different picture. They revealed that he was actually planning the crime. On the day of the hearing, a tourist was exploring the woods near where the teenagers were found murdered and stumbled upon an old, rusty refrigerator. Curious, he approached and opened the refrigerator and was horrified to discover 30 animal skulls inside. He also found 4 red and yellow skulls in plastic bags. The skulls were accompanied by diaries written in a strange, messy handwriting, titled The Book of Murders. The diaries, which began in 1989 and ended on the day of the 1993 murders of Christina and Brian, detailed his grisly experiments with animals and outlined his plans for Christina, which he then carried out exactly as described. He had previously made attempts to commit murder but had failed, which frustrated him. His violent urges were partly driven by his hatred for his mother and a desire to kill her. Additionally, his grandmother often told him stories about demons, which may have shaped his thoughts. This evidence led the prosecutor's office to conclude that Christina's murder was premeditated. Jason described himself as a killing machine in his diaries. After both the prosecution and defense delivered their closing statements, the jury began deliberating the verdict. After 3 hours, they found Jason Massey guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The next step was to evaluate the aggravating and mitigating circumstances to determine whether the death penalty was appropriate. The prosecution presented evidence from Jason's own diary, which detailed his gruesome actions, including the murders of 4 cats, 7 dogs, and numerous calves. He had a disturbing obsession with collecting animal heads as trophies. Testimonies from a few of Jason's friends revealed that he viewed acts of cruelty as a display of power and wanted to showcase it. The diary entries also indicated that he had no intention of stopping his violent behavior. One of his last entries expressed a desire to become the most notorious serial killer in the United States, claiming that he planned to kill over the next 20 years. It took the jury just 15 minutes to decide on the death penalty for Jason Massey on October 12, 1994. After the verdict was announced, the judge stated that executing Jason was a more humane option than what he had done to his victims. When Jason was taken to death row, he claimed that he had placed Christina's hands and head in a pillowcase along with her clothes and thrown them into the river. However, police were skeptical of his account, as he often kept trophies from his crimes. Jason was shocked by the conviction. He was determined to fight the verdict, so his lawyer filed an appeal on his behalf. Many advocates, including a Canadian coalition against the death penalty, spoke out in his support. Human rights advocates argued that the death penalty was inhumane and criticized the investigation, claiming that it was poorly conducted and ignored other potential suspects who were in the car during the kidnapping of Christina and Brian. Despite their efforts, their actions were ultimately in vain. On the evening of April 3, 2001, Jason was led to the execution chamber. For his last meal, he chose chicken legs, fried pumpkin, fried eggplant, mashed potatoes, green peas, boiled cabbage, corn, spinach with cheese, caramel fudge, pecans, ice cream, and a pot of sweet tea. Before his execution, Jason spoke to the victims' families, expressing his remorse for his actions. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among 3 siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peter spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with Peter. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and Peter's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and Peter, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and Peter were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, Peter and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. Peter and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. Peter and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and Peter, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, Peter planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, Peter and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, Peter also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after Peter stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. Peter and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of Peter and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely in such case. Kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. Peter's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peter's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peter. Any hope that Peter and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peter family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peter and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peter and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peter were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peter's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peter and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peter's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Boston, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peter has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peter detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Boston, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peter alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peter, and Boston, leading to suspicions that Boston could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Boston. She also felt it was essential to find Boston's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peter. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peter were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Boston's ship and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peter. Vince explained that their father, Boston, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peter, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Boston, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Boston was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peter, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peter's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Boston brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Boston pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Boston. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Boston. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Boston, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peter can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Boston believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Boston's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peter's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peter on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peter looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary's fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peter and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere tension and uncertainty filled after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peter and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peter. The next day, he tortured and abused Peter and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of them. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peter but were scared for their own safety. Peter asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Boston announced Peter and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over Peter and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Boston, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off Peter and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of Peter and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Boston disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Boston was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Boston's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Boston died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Boston learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Boston as a coward who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, Peter's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where Peta and Chris were buried. Henny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Gloria Pompili. Gloria Pompili was born in Frosinone, Italy, on December 18, 1993. She had a brother, and after they were born, their parents divorced. From the age of 6 to 16, Gloria was adopted by another family because her mother was very poor and could not afford to raise her. During this time, social workers closely monitored Gloria, believing she had a cognitive disorder with developmental delays. Even as an adult, she remained very naive and was easily manipulated. This naivety was evident in both her behavior and her overall perspective on life. Gloria did not receive a proper education, which later made it hard for her to find a job. As she grew up, she chose to leave the family that had adopted her and live on her own in a specialized institution. At 16, while living there, Gloria fell in love with a young man named Alex, who was about her age and of Romanian origin. They had 2 sons together, Gabriel and Emanuele. However, soon after, Alex was arrested and imprisoned for selling illegal substances. As a result, Gloria became a single mother, faced difficulties from society and shouldered the responsibility of raising her 2 young children on her own. Gloria tried her best to be a good mother despite facing difficult circumstances. Without a full-time job, she relied on her mother, Carmela, for support. Carmela's help allowed their small family to find stability with a modest income. Carmela worked as a cleaner at a local hotel, and together, they managed to handle their challenges. Things seemed to get better, especially when the children's father, Alex, was released from prison. However, Alex did not want to rekindle his relationship with Gloria, and instead quickly found a new girlfriend. Despite this, he maintained a good relationship with his children and occasionally helped them financially. At the end of 2015, Gloria went on an errand and unexpectedly met her aunt, Lloyd Dupreet, at the post office. After hearing about Gloria's struggles, Lloyd offered her a job as a saleswoman in a flower shop. Gloria was having difficulty finding work at the time, so this unexpected offer excited her. Trusting her aunt and believing she genuinely wanted to help, Gloria discussed the plan with her mother, Carmela. However, Carmela was not pleased with the proposal because she did not trust Lloyd and found the sudden offer suspicious. Despite Carmela's concerns, Lloyd and Gloria were able to persuade Carmela to agree to the plan. Lloyd thoroughly explained the job details, giving the impression that she genuinely wanted to help them during a tough time, while also finding a reliable worker for the shop. Gloria eagerly accepted her aunt's offer, oblivious to any potential risks. Unknown to Gloria, Lloyd was dating an Egyptian man named Saad Mohammed Alesh Salem. Saad was a legal migrant, but his brother Hadi was not. Lloyd devised a plan to help Hadi get a residence permit by arranging for Hadi to marry Gloria. Lloyd believed this would eventually lead to Hadi gaining citizenship. To facilitate this, she and Saad moved closer to the Gloria family. Lloyd offered Gloria a job to involve her more in their plan. Unaware of their real intentions, Gloria was captivated by Hadi when they met. Thinking she had finally found happiness, she agreed to marry him, not realizing the deceit behind their motives. Gloria's marriage to Hadi was arranged not out of love, but so Hadi could gain residency. They celebrated with Lloyd and Saad, but Gloria's happiness didn't last. After a brief celebration, they returned to Lloyd's house, an old building without heating. Gloria and her children had to leave their comfortable home and move into the tiniest room in a new apartment. Her Aunt Lloyd had promised Gloria a better life, including a potential job, but it became clear this was a deception. Lloyd never intended to help Gloria find work, and her delays only added to Gloria's hardship. In the months that followed, Gloria's living situation only worsened. Hadi quickly abandoned her, claiming he had found work in a nearby city. Gloria was left to care for her children alone, trapped in a cold and cramped room. Her Aunt Lloyd's empty promises had turned her life into a nightmare, one that would last for a year and a half. The apartment belonged to Lloyd, and she demanded that Gloria pay the rent. However, Gloria was unemployed and couldn't afford to pay. The family had no money, but Lloyd used another tactic to exert pressure. She criticized Gloria for being a bad mother. She threatened that if Gloria went to the police, her children would be taken away, just like Gloria was removed from her own mother. This threat deeply affected Gloria and left her feeling intimidated, though she hoped for a better outcome. Lloyd and Saad continued to insist Gloria pay for her stay, but she remained unable to settle the debt. They proposed a drastic way for her to earn money to cover her expenses, trading her own body. Gloria refused and begged to be allowed to go home. In response, Saad showed extreme anger and brutality. He regularly beat Gloria, and her children also suffered. On one occasion, he even threw stones at her son, leaving him with serious injuries. Gloria was locked in a room with her children, unable to escape. In order to be able to collect rent from Gloria, Lloyd and Saad pressured she to start servicing men, suggesting the room she shared with her children would be suitable for this purpose. Gloria refused once more. In response, they beat her and issued threats, but that doesn't work either. Too angry, Saad took Gloria's children, placed them in a wicker basket, tied a rope to it, and hung it precariously, threatening their safety. Fearing for her children's lives, Gloria is forced to comply with Saad and Lloyd's demands, and men begin to seek her out. Whenever she tried to refuse serving men, Saad and Lloyd abused her children again, and the beatings continued. The recent violence happened because Gloria had a low income. She had few clients, and her work generated very little money. For a long time, Gloria hoped this situation would end, and she dreamed of getting a job in a flower shop, believing it would improve her circumstances. However, she later discovered that her Aunt Lloyd did not own a flower shop. Lloyd continued to force Gloria into sex work and took every penny she earned. Even this was not enough for Lloyd. Since there weren't many clients, Lloyd made Gloria and the children beg on the streets under her supervision. All the money collected from begging was also taken by Lloyd, but this activity was too noticeable and risky, so they stopped it, and Gloria was forced to serve men again. Lloyd and Saad managed to bring more men for Gloria to serve. To cover up, Lloyd visited Gloria's mother, Carmela, and claimed that the children were fine, the family lived in another city, and Gloria was doing well at her flower shop job. This made Carmela suspicious, because she still talked to her daughter on the phone from time to time. During these calls, Gloria assured her mother that everything was fine. However, Gloria was so beaten down and scared that she lied to protect herself and the children. In their phone conversations, Gloria described her work as a salesperson. However, one thing puzzled Carmela. Gloria mentioned leaving home at 6 a.m. and returning late, which didn't match the typical hours of a flower shop. This seemed strange, but Carmela thought Gloria might be prepping and cleaning the store before and after hours, explaining the long work days. Despite this, Carmela trusted her daughter's words. Gloria never complained to her mother or asked for her help. By this time, Gloria has served men every day, and this unfortunate house is called the Pink House, due to the color the facade is painted. For Gloria's children, the house became a haunting place of fear and suffering. Lloyd took out their anger on Gloria daily, and her children were constantly abused. This went on for months. The eldest child later remembered never feeling safe there, shuddering at every noise. Neighbors suspected what was happening, as they often heard screams and cries and saw bruises and injuries on Gloria and her children. Some time after the events began, a neighbor contacted social workers. She reported that a family was cruelly treating their young children. Her explanations were vague, but she mentioned that the children were regularly hung in a basket from the balcony. Initially, this sounded strange and unbelievable, so the workers didn't take her claims seriously. Eventually, however, they decided to investigate. When they arrived at the address, they did see a strange basket hanging from the balcony. No one answered the door, so the employees used equipment to remove the basket from the railings. It was empty, so they concluded it was a prank and left. After these incidents, Gloria's situation deteriorated. She was beaten daily. The men, aka Gloria's clients, continued to her, and they also started taking her to a suburban highway where she stood next to a cafe to serve cars that stopped. During this time, Carmela heard from several acquaintances that her daughter, Gloria, was not doing well. Some mentioned Gloria and the bruises on her body. However, with every phone call, Gloria insisted that everything was fine. Lloyd told Carmela what she wanted to hear, that Gloria was happy in her marriage, could finally live a quiet life, and raise children. She said that Gloria was working a lot and therefore couldn't always stay in touch. Carmela believed her again. During this period, Gloria's aunt, Lloyd, increased her control over her. Lloyd was afraid she might cheat and keep some money, so Lloyd would count the condoms and insist that she return the used ones. Gloria complied, but Lloyd always found reasons to accuse her and took all the money whenever she bought food during work. This became another reason for Lloyd to punish and beat her. In 2016, Saad went to Egypt to visit family for 45 days. While he was there, he called Lloyd multiple times, expressing anger that Gloria was resisting. Gloria resisted Lloyd's attempts to force her into serving customers. To ensure obedience, Lloyd placed the children in a basket and dangled them off the balcony, threatening to cut the rope if Gloria did not comply. Neighbors noticed chaos in the apartment Lloyd's. Everyone was aware that Lloyd forced Gloria to beg, and the constant crying of the children in her apartment caused neighbors to start speculating. However, Lloyd created a false narrative, claiming that Gloria was unable to pay rent, while in truth, she was profiting from a criminal operation. Lloyd had a feeling that something was off and was worried that the police might come to investigate. A major obstacle in exposing Saad and Lloyd's criminal scheme is Gloria's behavior. She was too trusting and frequently lied to protect Lloyd, inventing stories that everything was fine. She sometimes claimed she served men because she wanted to and occasionally complained about being forced to curl her hair. When she confessed, her words were not believed. According to Gloria, her husband threatened her with violence against her and her children. She was terrified they would kill her children in front of her. She had already seen Saad throw stones at a boy, which heightened her fear. By 2016, due to fears of exposing criminal actions, Gloria and her 2 children relocated to avoid recognition and continue their activities. They moved into another apartment owned by Lloyd, along with Saad. However, the neighbors grew suspicious and noticed unusual behavior. When they met Gloria on the street, they urged her to move out, but she insisted she had nowhere else to go and struggled to manage alone with 2 children. Some neighbors provided assistance, with one even giving Gloria a free haircut. She slowly formed a friendship with a young man named Stephanie, who found out that Gloria had not completed her education and was in urgent need of employment and money. Even though they are friends, Gloria was too scared to share the abuse she experienced from Lloyd. Later, Stephanie witnessed more distressing incidents. A neighbor confessed seeing, from their apartment window, that Saad frequently visited Gloria and Lloyd. One night, the neighbor witnessed a horrifying incident. A man attacked Gloria, hitting her multiple times and then smashing her window with his head. When a neighbor returned to cut Gloria's hair, they noticed a deep cut on her head. Despite this, Gloria insisted that everything was fine and refused to share any details out of fear. In August 2017, Gloria managed to escape, but her tormentors, Saad and Lloyd, found her the next day. Saad picked her up in a car and brought her back home, where he began yelling at her, insulting her, and hitting her from the doorway. Throughout that month, the neighbor witnessed Gloria being beaten severely every day. Fresh bruises were visible on her face, but when asked about it, Gloria lied, saying it was her own fault or that she had been in accidents. On August 23, Gloria, who was clearly exhausted, was sent out to work again. Security footage later revealed that Saad and Lloyd physically forced her into Lloyd's car. Once inside, Saad struck her 3 hard blows to the face. He initially planned to circle the car and get into the driver's seat, but unexpectedly turned back, opened the door, and hit Gloria several more times. It seemed that she had tried to resist her tormentors again, refusing to comply with them. As a result, they coerced her into submission. Gloria was taken away around 3 p.m. A few minutes later, surveillance cameras at a nearby store captured her buying a chocolate bar. This was the last sighting of her. Witnesses, including the store clerk, reported that she appeared severely beaten, but when asked what had happened, she refused to answer. Despite her injuries, Gloria refused to accept help from others and continued to work on the street until the evening. Around 7:30 p.m., Saad and Lloyd returned in a car, this time accompanied by children, and she was made to sit in the back seat. Again, they took all her earnings for the day. Saad counted the money, ignoring the amount Gloria spent at the store, and scolded her for her low earnings and unexpected expenses. This upset Saad, and he stopped the car in a dark area, pulled Gloria out, twisted her arm behind her back, and delivered several heavy blows to her stomach. These blows later turned out to be fatal. Immediately after the assault, Gloria started choking and lost consciousness, prompting her attackers, Saad and Lloyd, to attempt first aid through artificial respiration. However, their efforts were futile, and Lloyd called for emergency services. Meanwhile, Gloria's children, aged 3 and 5, were in a panic, crying for their mother. Tragically, Gloria was already beyond saving, and officials confirmed her death at the scene. The young mother Gloria was brutally killed in front of her children. Her suffering lasted over 1.5 years before it finally came to an end. Afterward, Saad and Lloyd brought the children to their grandmother's house, where Gloria had lived for many years. There, they met with a social worker, and they made up a false story in an attempt to distract the police during the initial investigation. They fabricated a tale that claimed Gloria was using a banned substance and had fled, stating they found her in that condition without knowing what had happened. Eventually, law enforcement discovered the truth behind their fabricated account. The next day, Gloria's eldest child sought shelter from a social worker to request help and asked if he could share a secret. This secret appeared to be very traumatic, as the child clenched his fists in anger and helplessness, tears welling up in his eyes. He cried out that they had killed his mother, Gloria. Once he calmed down enough to speak, he told the social worker that Lloyd was actually very harmful. His face was filled with terror. After sharing a brief account, the boy stopped talking out of fear. However, his behavior was taken seriously, and his testimony was forwarded to the police, prompting a new direction in the investigation. The Carabinieri suspected that Gloria's husband, Hadi, may have been involved, suggesting that he had entered a phony marriage with Gloria's as part of a plot. Despite this, detectives found no evidence that he had treated either the children or his wife poorly. In fact, he seemed to interact well with everyone and was calm. However, after the marriage was registered, he showed little interest in the well-being of his wife and children. Hadi quickly confessed that he had used Gloria, marrying her without any intention of building a life together. Gloria's mother, Carmela, also corroborated this, stating that he had visited Gloria's with the children in the early days before the wedding. This behavior was intended to lower the Gloria family's guard while Lloyd carried out her malicious plan. Gloria's stepchildren were always friendly, but Hadi did not want to take on the role of a father to them. Ultimately, it was revealed that Hadi was not involved in the mistreatment of Gloria. However, he was aware of the terrible things happening to her but convinced the police that he could not change the situation. Hadi provided the police with a significant amount of helpful information that allowed them to piece together the difficult year and a half of suffering that Gloria endured before her death. While Hadi felt sympathy for Gloria, but he could not influence Saad's and Lloyd's actions in any way. At the slightest disagreement, they threatened to deport him back to his home country. According to Hadi, Gloria was under strict control and couldn't take any action without permission. Her tormentors, Saad and Lloyd, took all the money they could find, imprisoned her and her children, and they repeatedly abused her children to intimidate her into obeying their orders. Hadi stated that Gloria was so depressed recently that she hardly resisted or showed disobedience. Lloyd and Saad are clearly responsible for the abuse of Gloria and her children. Both have now been arrested and the investigation is ongoing. During this time, Lloyd and Saad began to give conflicting statements and blamed each other. Neither wanted to take responsibility for the horrific acts committed. Lloyd claimed that Saad did not respect women and treated them cruelly, stating that she had been a victim of his violence on multiple occasions. She recounted an incident during a trip to Egypt, where she said she fled after 15 days because she could no longer tolerate the disrespectful treatment of women in that country. However, Saad felt it was his duty to adhere to local customs, which led him to use violence and insults without hesitation. He was very strict and punished even the smallest mistakes, which caused Gloria and her children much suffering. The eldest child became so traumatized that he would urinate whenever he saw Saad, especially if he raised his voice or threatened punishment. Whenever Gloria resisted, Lloyd and Saad's anger would flare up, making him especially cruel during these times. The visible bruises on Gloria's body were a result of his abuse. Although Saad tried to blame Lloyd for the situation, Saad described Lloyd as cruel and unfeeling, claiming she enforced strict discipline on her niece, Gloria. She would punish harshly for minor infractions, whether it was due to not earning enough money for the day or even the slightest noise from the child. Saad attributed Lloyd's behavior to her Italian temperament, claiming she often raised her hands during arguments. Plus, Lloyd liked to provoke conflicts, often resorting to insults and physical force. This behavior contributed to her decision to leave Egypt, as she wanted to maintain a good reputation in front of her family. Detectives believed both Lloyd and Saad were responsible for the tragic incident that unfolded. If Lloyd was indeed a victim in her relationship with Saad, she could have sought help when he left for his homeland. Instead, she continued to harm Gloria. Saad, on the other hand, would not have returned to Lloyd if he was unhappy, yet he chose to maintain their relationship and came back to her after his trip. This suggests that both were complicit in their actions and share the blame. A few people who knew Gloria well reported that Gloria wanted to find a decent job to support herself and raise her children properly, but she was never given the opportunity. Her tormentors inflicted psychological harm on her young children. The older child, in particular, struggled with issues stemming from years of violence. The children witnessed their mother being beaten multiple times and were also subjected to regular beatings themselves. Whenever the children cried, they were punished further, with unreasonable demands for them to be silent. According to Gloria's eldest son, once when he witnessed another conflict, he became so frightened that he urinated and started crying. This infuriated Saad even more. He picked up the child and slammed him hard onto the floor. Following this incident, the child fell ill for an extended period. They simply placed him on the couch and did not seek medical attention. During the trial, Lloyd stated that Gloria, the children's mother, had been in a downward spiral and started engaging in prostitution at the age of 14. However, social workers who had been observing Gloria since her childhood contradicted this claim. They indicated that Lloyd's statements were part of a fabricated story intended to lessen her own punishment. Tragically, after a year and a half of violence, the situation culminated on August 27, 2017, when Gloria were brutally murdered in front of her children. Lloyd Delpreet Va Saad Mohammed Alesh Salem were convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to 24 years in prison, although the prosecutor had sought a harsher penalty. On May 11, 2021, their sentence was reviewed and reduced to 20 years. The court determined that social services did not properly handle the complaints about abuse Gloria's. Neighbors had reported troubling behavior, but social service workers only provided minimal assistance. Gloria's children were eventually adopted by another family, and the request for custody from their grandmother was denied. Nevertheless, Gloria's mother remains determined and continues to fight for custody of her grandchildren.